Afternoon. Good afternoon. Wonderful to see you all. Yes, thank you for being here. Thank you. My name is Kimberly Goodman, and I am the executive director here. And I have to tell you my story about my long-term relationship with lifelong learning. So I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and when I was in undergraduate, I started teaching for a program called Elder Hostel. Just another version of lifelong learning, and absolutely fell in love with it. And I was rejecting being a teacher because I wasn't going to be a teacher because my mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother were teachers. Ended up being a teacher, but I loved it so much. And when I moved to Columbus in the late 90s for graduate school at Ohio State, I looked for an LLI and I found one, and I sent them my resume, and my joke is that they said, "Don't call us, we'll call you." But they did call eventually, and I taught for almost 20 years. Just about every year I taught a course, and one of my favorites at one point, we were at Columbus State, and then we were at COTC Technical College out in Pataskala. I'd have 150 people in my class. I teach a 4-week class. So when I came to the MAC, the pandemic had happened, and unfortunately that LLI went away. Unfortunately, it was something easy to cut from the budget. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, here at the MAC, we're very beholden on rental clients. So we were having people come in and do things that didn't really have anything to do with our mission. So one day I was driving down the street about a year ago and thinking, what could we do during the day in our beautiful theater? And I thought, oh my gosh, let's start an LLI here. So that's why we're all here, so hooray. So thank you for being here. Thank you, thank you. So let me tell you a little bit about this beautiful building that you are in. How many of you have never been here before? Wonderful. Okay, I want you to come back. Please, please, we have so many things happening here. This is the original Worthington High School, built in 1915. Long story, you can read about it on our website. In 2009, this building was then reconstituted as the McConnell Arts Center, the Peggy R. McConnell Arts Center. We have 20,000 square feet. We have a painting and drawing studio on the second floor along with our administrative offices. We have a gorgeous gallery that next week you'll be able to see the art in there. It's being installed right now. Underneath us, we have a dance studio and a ceramic studio. We have classes 5 nights out of the week, and we have performances throughout the year. So there is a lot happening here. We would love to see you back. So please consider joining us as a member. We have a membership. You'll see that on the slides, and you'll get information about that on your email. There are some nice perks to membership, so we would love to have you do that. We have a sponsor for this series, and it is the Worthington Spotlight, which is our local paper, so I have to acknowledge them and thank them very much. Cliff Wiltshire is a great friend to the MAC. Also, the City of Worthington is one of our largest sponsors, and we're very grateful. Tonight is actually a Meet the Candidates night for City Council, and I'm thrilled to be hosting that here. But those are the kinds of events that we have here: community involved, arts engaged. A few housekeeping rules. Van is gonna do about 45 minutes and have a nice break for restroom, check your phone, all those things. Restrooms are on every level, but when you go out these doors to your right, there are restrooms there, but if you want downstairs, upstairs, there are restrooms there as well. Tomorrow night, we have a gallery exhibit opening, like I mentioned, from 6 to 8 p.m. That is free and open to the public, so please come if you are able. The week of September 25th, we have a double header that week. So we have a Monday and a Wednesday, so just check your schedule. There are 2 weeks that we have that where it's a Monday and a Wednesday. We have books on sale in the lobby of 2 of our upcoming guest speakers. So Alexis Wilson, an incredible author, has an amazing life story. Her book is called Not So Black and White. And I can't give away the story, but it's a great story. And it will be helpful to you to read the book in advance, just to know a little bit about her. But she's an incredibly engaging speaker. I know her very well because her husband is Byron Stripling, who is the artistic director of the Columbus Jazz Orchestra that I worked for 8 years. So that'll be a family week for me. And then also, so that's October 2nd. The week before, David Cohen is a gentleman who lives in Central Ohio who has written a book about World War II veterans and tells their story in an extremely compelling way. So again, you can pick up their books on the way out. I think that's all that I have. of announcements, and we can't wait to see you again next Wednesday. And Van, you want to come take it away? Welcome, Van Young.
Well, folks, she's going to stay. I thought she was leaving. I cannot tell you how honored I am, Kim, to be invited to speak to the new LLI here in Worthington. I've done this and continue to do it so for several other LLIs, and I am just really, really impressed that finally Worthington has an organization like this. So let's give Kim a big hand for bringing us LLI. Overdue, and so glad, in fact, that you were able to put it together for us, Kim. Well, this is going to be fun, folks, and I love to entertain while teaching about our great American history. We are going to have some prizes for those of you who can answer a few questions when called upon. And even if you don't, you might end up still getting a nice little sugary treat, which we'll get to at the break, I'm sure. I guess I also want this to be interactive in that if I say something or challenge you with a question and you have some comments you'd like to add to it, please raise your hand and then just speak out loud if you really want to add anything that I'm going to tell you about today. And so with that said, let's get started. And before we get started, let me put a shameless plug in. One of the things that I do, other than play pickleball, guys, is I'm the president, if you haven't seen me before, of the Worthington Griswold Center, our senior center's American History Study Group. And after today, if I inspire you to want to learn more about our great nation's history, we have a meeting format group in which I invite a presenter to come in and present for about 45 minutes or so. Then we have open discussion and dialogue about the topic. We study any and all aspects of American history, the presidents, the first ladies, eras of our history, famous people, famous events. I have outside speakers like professors and authors talk about some aspect of our nation's past. So you're welcome to join that. As you can see, we meet 10 to 11:30, but the good news is, I guess, we meet via Zoom. So if you can't get out and you don't feel like driving and parking, etc., you can join our meetings via Zoom. And so I have my email posted and I have cards afterwards to give at the break, etc. You just need to grab my email address, send me an email showing interest. I'll send you one back giving you the instructions on how to register and be part of our American History Study Group. But today, to kind of kick off history for the LLI here, I thought I would start with one of my favorite topics in presentations, which is a general potpourri, trivia, facts, and share information in a fun way. So let's see how many of these items from your exposure to American history, which was probably quite some time ago, and see how much of it you retained. American history. My first recollection of the subject was in the 8th grade when I took my first American history class. When did you take yours? Because mine was middle school. There are two things that I'll never forget about the class. It was the first time that I ever had to take an essay test, remember that, and I got to sit behind Candy Swatko, the most beautiful girl in the world. Folks, it was truly my first crush. I can still see her ponytail swinging back and forth. I could smell her beauty. She was just gorgeous. I loved Candy. Of course, never got to first base, but that's beside the fact. Well, back to the history class, our basketball coach taught it, of course, and I remember learning about the Alamo, which I thought was just a movie starring John Wayne. Back then, you took American history again when you got to high school, remember? And I must admit that, maybe because I had good teachers, but history quickly became my favorite all-time subject, an interest that I have kept even to this day. Well, what about America? Well, as the United States of America, we are technically defined as a federal constitutional republic. We cover 3.7 million square miles and are home to a population of over 333.5 million people. We are comprised, yes, of 50 states, one federal district, Washington, D.C., 3 territories, American Samoa, did you know that? Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and believe it or not, we have 2 commonwealths, Puerto Rico and the Northern Mariana Islands. Did you know that one? I'm impressed if you did. So what are the ties that bind together a country as far-reaching and as diverse as ours? Well, throughout our history, we've lived through what we call the best of times, and we've lived through the worst of times. Yet the heart of our society continues to beat mightily. We are not a people made from a single stock or a single culture. Rather, we're a medley of colors, races, religions, and ethnicities. Now, English is spoken here the most, but more languages are spoken in the United States than in any other country in the world. Think about that. Between 350 to 430 languages are spoken in the United States. We also eat the most diverse foods. Think of all of our restaurant chains. We listen to the most diverse music. Yeah, well, that's not a bad point, right? All these different styles of music. We certainly play the most diverse sports, and we watch, I think, the most diverse movies and television shows. But the one thing that all Americans have in common is our history. It doesn't matter if you are the first generation or the 12th generation American, we all own our history. It really is, I feel, what makes us American. So today I want to pay tribute to our great American history by sharing some of its more unique, unusual, and remarkable facts and trivia. So get ready to have some fun, learn some history, and impress your friends as we journey through the history of the United States. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Now, Christopher Columbus is generally given credit for finding America in 1492, but as you all probably know, he never really did. He sighted the Bahamas and made land on what is now Haiti and the Dominican Republic. But Columbus never realized that he had even sailed to the New World. He died in 1506, completely certain that he had either reached China or Japan. That was his destination. He kind of bumped into us along the way. But he really did not. And if you look at the slide, you'll see that he leaves Palos, Spain on August the 3rd of 1492, buzzed around some of those other islands. But on October the 12th, he reaches the Bahamas and lands on a little-known island called Guahanai, which has since been renamed to San Salvador. And then several weeks later, he puts into port at Juana, which is now today Cuba, and then stays around for a while, and eventually, before he heads back, on December the 6th, he stops at Haiti, which is, of course, now Haiti. So as many times as we've thought that he discovered America, he never really did. And I don't know why we're so, I guess, fixed on laying claim to that discovery by him. And so you can see that first voyage. So how did America then get its name? Well, inspired by the voyages of Columbus, but more impressed with another explorer by the name of Amerigo Vespucci, a Swiss map maker by the name of Martin Waldseemüller decided to draw a map of the New World in 1507. And he wrote the name America across the face of that new continent. Now, he struggled between using the name America or Vespucci, which means our country could have been called the United States of Vespuccia. Can you imagine? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of Vespuccia. So we're kind of glad he went with that first name, aren't we? I kind of think we are, because I sure am. Now, our current American flag is the most visible symbol of America. Walk through any town in the United States, and you will see it displayed at the post office, schools, police and fire stations, and at sporting events. Now, there are 50 stars against a blue background for every state, and 13 horizontal stripes representing the original 13 colonies. But which color has the most stripes? Well, 7 of them are red and 6 of them are white. Now, the Second Continental Congress officially adopted our first flag on June the 14th, 1777. Its main purpose, however, was to be used as a maritime flag to identify our American naval ships, and that lasted until 1834, when the Army adopted it as its battle flag. It did not come to represent our nation until many years later. As a matter of fact, the term Old Glory was coined back in 1831. Our current flag, the one we see today, was established in 1960, making our flag just 63 years old. You would have thought it would have been way back in 1776, but technically our flag is only 63 years old. And speaking of our flag, then there is the story of Betsy Ross. Now, born Elizabeth Griscom in 1752, she was the 8th of 17 children. She was raised as a Quaker and apprenticed as an upholsterer. At the age of 21, aghast, she eloped with a fellow apprentice by the name of John Ross, and they opened up an upholstery shop in Philadelphia where they did general sewing and upholstery work for the home. During the Revolutionary War, husband John joined the militia. This was before we actually got into a war. We had militias at every one of the colonies. And he dies in 1775 when a bunch of gunpowder he was guarding exploded. After only 2 years of marriage, she was a childless war orphan struggling to keep her upholstery business alive. But then, in late May of 1776, a committee of the Continental Congress composed of George Washington, Robert Morris, and George Ross, her late husband's uncle, they came to Betsy and asked her to make a flag following a sketch that Washington himself had created. Now, Betsy suggested alterations to that original design, and in particular, changing the 6-pointed stars to 5-pointed ones, since she could create them easier and faster with her scissors. Now, the committee was impressed, and she was awarded the task of making the first American flag in June of 1776. She continued to make American flags for another 50 years as part of her business. Now, Betsy Ross will marry and be widowed twice more and will bore 7 daughters. She retired in 1827, turning the business over to her family, and then 9 years later died at the age of 84. That's pretty remarkable in those times to live to be that age. Well, as you know, the most prominent American holiday is the 4th of July. It's the birthday of our country, and boy, do we ever celebrate. Families gather for picnics, parades, concerts, carnivals, and fireworks. We think it's to celebrate the signing of the Declaration of Independence, but it's a bit more involved than that. Earlier, the Second Continental Congress had petitioned King George III to protect the colonists from Parliament, who kept taxing them often and unreasonably. King George, however, ignored their petition. And so the colonies finally said, enough is enough, and you know the rest of that story. But on June 11th of 1776, a committee was formed to draft a document stating our, quote, affirmation of sovereignty. Now, Thomas Jefferson took on the task of writing the document. The Second Continental Congress voted on July the 2nd to officially accept the Declaration. So the day Congress actually voted us free from British rule was on July 2nd, 1776. Yet, of course, we celebrated on July 4th. And that's because the 4th of July is when John Hancock put the first signature on the Declaration of Independence in order to spread the word. However, it was not put onto parchment until August 2nd. The Declaration of Independence was the first time that the term the United States of America was ever used. Celebrating the 4th of July did not even start until after the War of 1812, and the 4th of July was not even made a national holiday until the year 1870. And by the way, the original parchment copy of the Declaration is housed at, anybody? The National Archives. You get a piece of candy, sir. Yes, right. National Archives in Washington, D.C. By show of hands, how many have seen it? Have you seen it? Good. It's worth the trip, worth the wait sometimes, but clearly worth it. All right, well, now it is your turn. I think I've talked enough about our great history. Let's see how many of these you might know. Just shout out the answer, and then if you get it correctly, come get a piece of candy now or at the break. So here we go. Who is the only United States president to own a U.S. government patent, what? And a saloon? A patent and a saloon. I gotta think about that one, Van. Geez, I don't know. Who's been kicked out of office? I don't know. Well, the correct answer is Abraham Lincoln. Can you believe it? The only U.S. president to own both a patent and a saloon. Abe got the patent for a device he invented to lift boats over sandbars. Never, quote, got off the ground, and he failed to make any money at it, but he actually got it patented. Then he got his liquor license in 1833 and opened a bar, a saloon, with his good friend by the name of, what is his first name? Something Berry, and opened an establishment that was a saloon called Berry and Lincoln. But it was a miserable failure, and Lincoln sold out his interest to his partner about 6 months after going into business with him. So that is the answer to that question. Who was the only president to serve as an executioner? What? You mean he actually executed and killed somebody and got elected? Yes, he did. The only president to serve as an executioner was Grover Cleveland. Now, at the time, he was the sheriff of Erie County, New York, and personally was given the task of pulling the lever that allowed a man to hang on a conviction of murder. And that hanging occurred on February the 14th, 1873. So back then, a small town sheriff not only was the sheriff, but he was also considered to be the executioner. So that's a kind of a neat trivia one to put in your hat. Here's one that I'll be impressed. Who was the first president born in the United States of America? Well, that's kind of an easy one, right? It was Adams? Do you think it was Washington? Who was the first one? I heard it and he got it right. Our 8th president, Martin Van Buren, was the first president born in the United States of America. He is also the first president born speaking a language other than English. Do you know what that one is? Dutch, that is correct. And he's the firstborn president once the United States had declared its independence from Great Britain. And so our first 7 presidents, George Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, John Quincy, and Andrew Jackson, were all born on the continent as subjects of the king. And they did not become American citizens until after the signing of the Constitution. So the first true president born on soil here and in the United States of America was Martin Van Buren. Are you a blood relative of a Pilgrim? You might be. Do we have any ones that know? Oh my goodness, see? Well, you'll see this, why that's relative. It is estimated that 1 in 10 of us could be a blood relative to one of the original Pilgrims who arrived aboard the Mayflower in 1620. About 35 million Americans share their DNA with at least one of the 102 Pilgrims. So in essence, you stand about a 10% chance of being related to a Pilgrim. And I just, by the way, sent in as a gift for my daughter the DNA test. So I'm anxious to see where I am, because I'm all over the map, I'm sure, like many of us. Interesting to see. Hey, statistically speaking, what do you think the deadliest job is in America? As a profession. You are correct, sir. Logging is the deadliest job in America. As a matter of fact, it's 33 times more dangerous than any other job in America. But I have to ask you, what is the second deadliest job in America? Good one, good one, good one. Well, the second deadliest job in America is being a United States president. 45 men have served 46 presidencies. Now, 4 have been assassinated in office. And so that's roughly an 8% death rate, or about a 1 in 10 chance of dying as being the president. And of course, it's technically speaking, they all died on the job. And so statistically, if you look it up, the death of a president is the second deadliest job in America. And by the way, the 4 that were killed on the job, how many of you can name them all? There they are. Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, James Garfield, and William McKinley. And what state were 2 of those 4 presidents from? Yeah, isn't that amazing? 2 of the 4 assassinated presidents are from OHIO. How about that? This is one of my favorites. Is the United States government still paying Civil War pensions to anyone? That would be a long time, right? Well, the answer to this question for several years was a yes, but unfortunately, she just passed away. Irene Triplett, the lady you see on the upper right, was the last person to receive a federal pension from the Civil War. And she just recently died at the age of 97 on May 31st, 2020 in North Carolina. Now, her father, bottom right, was a man by the name of Mose Triplett, and he originally started the war with the Confederate Army, but deserted them in 1863. And then about a year later, he joins up and enlists with the Union Army. Now, Mrs. Triplett, Irene, was born in 1930 when she was 83. Severely disabled, she, yes, in fact, did draw a Civil War military survivor's pension of $73.13 per month until her death in 2020. So I don't know what's more amazing, her longevity or him fathering a child at 83, but it was worth mentioning to you. I just had to share that with you. Wow. The largest Air Force in the world is the United States Air Force. What is the second largest Air Force in the world? You got it. Boy, we got some good people. The combined aircraft of the Navy and our Marine Corps is the second largest aircraft in the world by total aircraft count. Now, Russia is definitely third, and China is fourth, so a bit scary with that. And I have to ask, well, I'll ask it a little bit later, a question, follow-up question to that. So we have the 2 largest air forces in the world, and of course the sky rules when it comes to war, so glad we have those 2 forces behind us. Here's one. Which Great Lake, we have 5 Great Lakes, which has enough water in it to cover the entire land mass of both the North and South American continents, including Central America, in 1 foot of water? It's like a bathtub. If we took a drain and we unscrewed it, all the water in this lake would cover all of those continents in 1 foot of water, and you got it. Lake Superior. And you can see they're mentioned there. Of course, we have Lake Superior. Lake Huron is in the middle, over to the left, lower left, Lake Michigan, all the way to the right, Lake Ontario, and Lake Erie. What I didn't realize until I kind of looked at this map, notice that all of those lakes are connected. So you technically could go from the furthest end of Lake Ontario and sail or boat all the way to the tip of Lake Superior. Has anybody done a cruise, a Great Lakes cruise by chance? Those are becoming somewhat popular now that you can go up and take 3- and 4-day cruises and be able to journey all through those lakes. But that's how deep Lake Superior is. Pretty remarkable, to say the least. Pretty remarkable. This is an easy one. Well, first of all, let's talk about some White House history. I guess this was an easy one, too. What is the address of the White House? What was it again? Well, that's part of the address. What is the zip code of the White House? Can't really have the address without the zip code. It's 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, 20500. I don't know nowadays if a letter still gets to a destination if you don't have the zip code, but I tried to trick you just to see if you were, if anybody knew that. Nobody's ever guessed it since I've thrown that question out before. Who was the first president to live in the White House? You sure? Okay. Yes, he was. John Adams was the first president to live in the White House. He moved in on July 16th, 1790. Remember, Washington dies in 1769, so 2 years later. Congress declared the city of Washington in the District of Columbia and to become the permanent capital of the United States. Anybody know the name of Washington, D.C. before it became Washington, D.C.? I think I heard it. It's called Washington City. So it was always called Washington City until they decided to make it the permanent capital of the United States. And there is John Adams. His move-in day was the 1st of November, 1800, if I didn't say that. How many presidents have actually died in the White House? Anybody know that one? Passed away in the White House. Actually, only 2 of them. William Henry Harrison from Ohio, who died of pneumonia within, 30-some days of being in office. That occurred in 1841. And Zachary Taylor passed away in the White House in 1850. Anybody know the original color of the White House? Oh, gee, wasn't it white? No, that was not the original color of the White House. That color was gray. Well, geez, what do you mean? And that is because on August the 24th, 1814, as the War of 1812 raged on, invading British troops marched into Washington and set fire to the U.S. Capitol and the President's Mansion, as it was called back then, and other local landmarks in Washington. Wait, we went to war twice with England? You bet we did. The War of 1812 and, of course, the Revolution. Now, it was repainted white because they had to cover up all the burn marks, because this wasn't burned to the ground, but it was torched enough that they had to repaint it, and that is when they decide to paint it white. And formerly known as the Presidential Palace, it only then became known as the White House in 1814. So the original color was gray, and now, of course, we know the color of it. And another one of my favorites, 2 of them. How many rooms are in today's White House? 21, 37, 79, or 132? Somebody must have been there on a tour, were you? No? She guessed right, though. The White House has 132 rooms, 35 bathrooms, 6 different levels. I always thought there were just 3. 412 doors, 147 windows, 28 fireplaces, 8 staircases, and 3 elevators. Has anybody taken a tour of the White House recently? No, I've never taken one, and I kind of wish. Yes? Yes.
Is it possible that there are rooms underground that the public doesn't know about?
I would think so.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Sure wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
But yeah, who would have thought 132 rooms in the, because remember, there are wings that go off to the right and to the left that house many, many more rooms, but they're technically part of the White House. Was Uncle Sam a real person? That man you see in the poster, was he a real person or not? He was. Yes, he was actually a meat packer for the United States government by the name of Samuel Wilson. Now, he stamped boxes of meat with US for United States, but many joked that the US stood for Uncle Sam, who that was his nickname. When they were designing the poster, a call went out, an ad in the local paper for anybody who would like to come and sit to be the model for the poster. And of course, Sam Wilson got talked into it by his friends. They liked the way he looked, his rugged appearance. And so he was selected to sit for the model of the poster that we know as Uncle Sam. So yeah, isn't that odd that he really was a real person? Well, let's take pause for the cause here. It's been a good 45 minutes. Feel free, folks, to come up and grab a piece of candy, especially if you got an answer correct. We'll just take about 5 to 10 minutes. We'll convene and get even deeper into this great American history of ours. Answer any questions if you have any or comments you want to make as well. Or you don't have to. How about a piece of candy? Oh, yes, sir. Thank you for bringing that up. And grab a piece of candy. Yeah, just send me an email and I'll just get you all that information.
Exactly, exactly. Test, test, test. Oh, it does work. Wonderful. Thank you. Are you ready to go? So, first of all, that was a wonderful first half. Thank you, Van. That's fascinating. Thank you so much. Excellent, excellent. He's doing a wonderful job. I wanted to let you know that this is being live streamed. So with your registration, whether you chose to do the semester-long subscription or if you're going to buy the classes as sort of a la carte, along with that, you get a link to where this is being streamed on YouTube. And if you have an appointment during that time and you can't be there, we can watch it later. So that's really, really exciting. Yes, and also I recommended to Van that if someone does make a comment or question from the audience, to definitely repeat that so the folks at home can hear that. And then Van would like to have folks do questions, comments at the end, and we'd like to pass around the microphone again so that that can be heard at the end. Yes? It went out this morning, yes. So you should see. You may not have seen it this morning. We were getting everything together the last minute, but you'll have it for sure. Absolutely. I have a quick story. Can I share with you real quick, Van?
Please.
Okay. So you saw the picture of the sailor kissing the nurse, right? The famous iconic picture. My husband and I, one of my favorite New York trips, because this can only happen in New York, right? This was in maybe 2006, 2007. I was there for a conference, and a man, we were at Times Square, and a man asked me for the time, because people were sort of carrying cell phones, but not like we do now. And the gentleman said, you know, what time is it? And he said, well, thank you. And he said, would you like to meet my friend? And he said, this is the woman, it was the nurse that's in that picture, and she was there commemorating the whatever anniversary of the picture, and they gave us a little postcard, and she signed it, and she was about this big. She was teeny tiny, and she's passed since then, but only in New York, right? Isn't that incredible? Yeah, it's really, really neat, so, yeah.
And Kim, I use that picture in another talk I give on famous historical photos, and of course you can imagine that one is there. But the photographer who was working for the New York Post at the time, he was only given one assignment that day when they told him to go out. And of course, this is Victory over Europe Day. And that was try to go take a picture that kind of captures the moment. And boy, did he not with that picture. So thank you, Kim. That's a great story. I also, at the end, kind of would like the audience member who told us that she is related to a pilgrim. She's going to tell us a little bit more about that when we're done here today. Well, now some interesting facts. I've kind of challenged you with some questions. More to come on the questions. But here's some interesting facts that you may not have heard before. The 7 rays on the crown of the Statue of Liberty represent the 7 continents. Each one measures up to 9 feet in length and weighs as much as 150 pounds. Has anybody visited the Statue of Liberty? Oh my goodness, has anybody gone up to the top of the Statue of Liberty? Is it well worth the experience to do it?
Yes, interestingly, I got to go up. It was closed for several years after that.
Right.
And I went up like a month after they reopened.
Oh, did you? Because I've passed it on cruises, but I've never visited it, and I kind of want to. Okay.
It's worth it.
How long are you allowed to stay up there?
Not very long.
Not very long.
But
But
it's still worth it.
easily able to take great pictures when you're up there, right? Oh, wow. Yes, and our immigrants is one of the first things that they supposedly see if they can get out of the bottom of the ship when they first come into that harbor. Beautiful, beautiful statue, a gift from our friends from France. Yeah. Do you know that South Dakota has over 4 times as many cows as it does people? As of this year, there are 3,650,000 cows and cattle versus just 844,777 people. And folks, that is no bull, right? A little American history humor there. Same holds true with 3 other states of ours, including Montana, I might add. So we still eat a lot of meat, even though we shouldn't, I guess, but we're still meat eaters here in the United States. Did you know that the first draft of the Declaration of Independence was actually written on parchment paper, which is made from animal skin chiefly sheeps, goats, and calves. Did you know that? That parchment is made out of animal skin? And that was considered the best way to preserve a document was to write it on parchment paper way back when. And you can see how they do that by stretching the skin very, very, very thin. And it's thicker, of course, than our paper today, but not a whole lot more, but thicker. And again, you can see that in the National Archives. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, I hope you know, both died on the same day, July the 4th, 1826, 50 years to the day after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. What are the odds of that, folks? What are the odds that not only they die on the same day, but it's on the 4th of July, which is almost unbelievable. But the trivia question on this one is, which one of those men died first? Jefferson or Adams? Ding, Jefferson. Yes, he died 5 hours earlier than Adams. And if you don't know, they were for sure political rivals, and at one point almost bitter enemies for many years of their lives. But as they got older, they gave that up, became much closer, and finally became very dear friends. And they were both concerned about the health of the other one on the day of their death. So yes, Jefferson died before, but boy, ironic that it was 50 years to the day after our Declaration of Independence. Did you know that the Liberty Bell was last rung on George Washington's birthday in February of 1846? It received its fatal crack just a few hours later, However, it also rang to mark the signing of the Constitution and the deaths of the following men: Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and Thomas Jefferson. Some pretty elite folks that bell was rung for. I haven't yet visited, but how many of you have visited the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia? Look at all the hands, geez. Well worth that visit? Or is it just another bell? Do you have to pay to see it? No, it's a freebie? Okay, I just didn't know how accessible it was or how close you could get to it, but I'm sure it's part of a tour. Or do you have a docent with you telling you and teaching you much? No? It's just there? Interesting. I guess I thought it would be maybe a bigger deal. What's that? Well, nobody knows. Evidently a deficiency in the metal that was used for the bell. And Paul Revere did not make the Liberty Bell. Did you know that? I thought he had, but he did not, so we can't blame him for that. But it's a pretty big crack if you look at it. It clearly makes the bell kind of sort of inoperable, I guess, but they decided not to ring it anymore. You know, Virginia has given us 8 presidents: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, Zachary Taylor, and Woodrow Wilson. Now, they were all born in Virginia, making it the birthplace of more presidents, 8 of them, than any other state. Is that true? Well, kind of, sort of. Don't forget, Ohio has also contributed 8 presidents. Well, then why are they bragging? Well, that's because our Ohio president, William Henry Harrison, was actually born in Berkeley Plantation, Virginia in 1773. So technically speaking, we had 8 presidents serve, but only 7 of them were actually born in Ohio. So we're 1 behind the great state of Virginia. But don't forget how incredibly significant Virginia was in the early days of our American history. You realize that all of those presidents, our earliest, as a matter of fact, came from Virginia, but also remember that what we know as West Virginia today was part of Virginia until the year 1863, smack dab in the middle of the war, when West Virginia seceded from Virginia. So if you put those two states together geographically, Virginia was a huge state back in our early history. And it's interesting that President Lincoln was vehemently opposed to secession. He didn't want any state to secede, felt it wasn't, that he had the constitutional right to force a state back into the Union, except for when West Virginia wanted to secede, and then he was all for it and instantly said, yes, secede, and made it a state. So a little bit of politics going on there, to say the least. Do you know that during the War of 1812, the British did bomb our Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor on September the 14th, 1814. Now, Francis Scott Key, pictured in the middle there, which at the time was a lawyer and an amateur poet, he witnessed that attack and then immortalized it in a song titled "The Star-Spangled Banner." But remember, Francis Scott Key only wrote the lyrics. The actual song was written by the man on the right, John Stafford Smith. So we think that it's all about Francis Scott Key, but we need to recognize the other fellow who gave us that music that we all can sing to today, I guess, if pressed into service. But the lyrics certainly were written by Francis. And also, did you know that Congress did not establish the Star-Spangled Banner as our national anthem until 1931? I would have thought it was our national anthem since 1776, but no, we don't establish it as the national anthem until 1931. That means both my parents were born and alive prior to the national anthem being voted in as our, Star-Spangled Banner being voted in as our national anthem. I think that's pretty interesting. Yes? No? No, but remember, we probably would have hummed the anthem of the Queen, or the King, as our anthem. A lot of grassroots back to England, of course, for a lot of things that we kind of kept or adhered to. But no, it wasn't until 31 that we voted in the Star-Spangled Banner. Well, back to you again. True or false? The symbol of the United States Marine Corps includes a globe and anchor. True. You think so? Yes. You are correct. The United States Marine Corps symbol is an eagle sitting atop of a globe and anchor, indicating the service's origin in the United States Navy. Now, you can confirm this, sir. Although both the Navy and the Marine Corps are regarded as separate branches of the military, the Marine Corps is technically still a part of the U.S. Navy ever since Congress placed the Marines under the Navy in 1834. Do you know that that's a fact?
Yeah, in fact, if you go to Annapolis as a midshipman,
Yes.
you have the choice of going into the Marines.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Maybe, yeah.
Wow. Oh, I'm sorry for our folks there. What the gentleman was just saying is that that is a true statement that the Marine Corps is technically still a part of the U.S. Navy, and that if a cadet at, a midshipman at Annapolis goes there, of course, he gets to choose between whether he wants to enter the Navy or the Marines after graduation. So he would be a second lieutenant in the Marines, correct? Okay, I did not know that. See what I learned? See what I learned? Okay, folks, well, that's a little factoid that I will remember, absolutely. All right, yes?
Interestingly enough, the United States Marine Corps is the Western Hemisphere. British Royal Marines, their emblem is the Eastern Hemisphere.
Wow, the observation is concerning that emblem you see on the screen. The Marine Corps represents the Western, it was the Western what again? One more time?
Western Hemisphere.
Oh yes, the Western Hemisphere, and the Royal Navy of England symbol represents the Eastern Hemisphere. So the Royal Hemisphere. The Royal Marines represents the Western Hemisphere. Or the Eastern, I'm sorry. The Eastern and the Marines are the Western. Got it. Got it. Oh, that's interesting. Thanks for the feedback. This is great. True or false? Alaska became the 50th U.S. state in 1949. Boy, somebody knows their history. Correct. False is the right answer. Alaska was the 49th state in to become part of our union. However, it did not gain statehood until 1959, the same year in which number 50, Hawaii, was admitted. So both those states became states. I was 7 when they became part of the United States. And of course, we had to go get a new flag as a result. True or false? No U.S. senator has ever been expelled from office. Well, we got a lot of candidates sometimes for it. But have we ever expelled someone from the Senate? Not the House, just the Senate. Have we ever expelled yet a U.S. senator from office? Well, folks, drum roll, please, because the answer is false. As of 2020, 15 U.S. senators have been expelled from office for committing various crimes, because you had to commit a crime in order to be expelled. And the list is too long for me to list, but isn't it kind of disappointing that we've had that many senators expelled from office due to various crimes? True or false? The Scopes monkey trial concerned evolution. Anybody remember that? There's also a famous movie about it. It turns out that it's a true statement. In the 1925 trial, school teacher John T. Scopes was found guilty and fined $100, although in today's money that would be $1,606, for violating Tennessee law by teaching evolution. Now, it was eventually overturned on a technicality, but it would go on to allow, that trial set a precedent to allow for modern science to be taught in public schools nationwide thereafter. And a great movie, if you haven't seen it, Inherit the Wind, starring Spencer Tracy and Frederick March, is a great way to view this trial because of the testimony that they argue about. And by the way, John Scopes was only a substitute biology teacher that day. He was not the main teacher. This would have never occurred. He just decided to wing it, and so he started teaching about evolution. The kids run home, tell the parents, and the next thing you know, he's in handcuffs. But think about what that changed. Up to that point, across the United States, you really could only talk from a biblical perspective of how life came about. And after the Scopes trial, biology class became a whole different way of teaching. And that's when evolution started being taught in the public schools, was after the 1925 Scopes monkey trial, as it was called. And there is John Scopes, Clarence Darrow, and William Jennings Bryan, a man who ran for president but did not get elected at one point in his career. True or false? No amendment to the United States Constitution has ever been repealed. And we have 26 of them. And yes, folks, the 18th Amendment prohibiting the use or sale of alcohol was repealed by the 21st Amendment back in 1933. Now, if you can believe it, folks, I don't think any of you were here when it was passed, but if you can believe it, Prohibition in America lasted 14 years, from 1919 to 1933. And of course, the speakeasies were a way to get around it. You were allowed to make beer at home, and there were some other little caveats to the amendment, the 18th Amendment. But imagine trying to do that today, and we're getting close, don't forget, to kind of having another similar experience if marijuana becomes nationalized, right, to where recreational marijuana will be allowed nationally. It will be very similar to the experience that we've had with alcohol over our country's history. True or false, Alaska is the only American state to have been ruled by a king. Alaska, was it the only American state to have been ruled by a king? Smart cookies here, folks. False is the answer. Apart from the 13 original colonies, once ruled by English royalty, Hawaii is the only state ever to have been a monarchy, which is defined as a country ruled by either a king or a queen. And may I ask, who was that king? Oh, somebody must have been to Honolulu. Yes, it was King Kamehameha I. Great story about Hawaii's history, how many battles were fought in Hawaii, how many people tried to invade but never could overtake Hawaii. So credit to the King Kamehameha for keeping everything intact so we could go there on vacation, right? So we could go there on vacation. True or false? In 1950, New York was the only city in the United States with a population of 10 million people. True or false? Got some New York folk here, I think. It is false. In 1950, New York City only had a population of 7,891,000 people. New York's population today is 8,490,000 people as of the 2022 timeframe, which is only an 8% increase back to what it was in 1950. And as a comparison, Columbus is smaller physically by 79 square miles and has 7,574,000 less people. Again, the city limits of Columbus only has about 915,000, and that's a good thing, right? Like, you know, can you imagine that many more people on our roads and highways if we were the size of New York City? True or false? Jim? The first black baseball player in the major leagues was Jackie Robinson. True? Did I hear it true? That's what I would have thought. That is correct. Robinson was the first in the modern era. Now, blacks did play Major League Baseball in the late 1800s, but were let go from all of the teams in baseball by 1889. Moses Fleetwood Walker, nicknamed Fleet, is considered to be the first black man to play in Major League Baseball. He's actually from Mount Pleasant, Ohio, played for the Cincinnati Red Stockings for just one season. So technically speaking, in all of baseball history, he was the first, but in the modern era, certainly it was Jackie Robinson. Thought I could get you, but Jim, I knew you would get that for some reason. True or false? Ponce de Leon went to Florida to seek the mythical fountain of youth. Sounds good to me. Did he ever find it, by the way? True or false, did he go to Florida to find the fountain of youth? Well, the answer is false. He purposely went to the New World in order to enslave Florida native Seminoles for forced labor at one of his plantations on the island of Haiti. So he isn't a good guy, he's a bad guy, and he never did find anything related to that fountain of youth. By the way, it does exist if you go to Florida. I forget, where is it again? St. Augustine, yeah, it is down there somewhere. At least that's what I saw. True or false? George Wallace, remember George Wallace, 1968 presidential candidate? George Wallace was considered a racist because he said the following, quote, I have no purpose to introduce political and social equality between the white and black races. There is a physical difference between the two, which will probably forever forbid their living together. And I am in favor of the race to which I belong as having the superior position. Did he say that? He did not. Abraham Lincoln said that while debating Stephen A. Douglas, Senator Stephen A. Douglas, in 1858. Now, Lincoln loses that election. And don't forget, Illinois is, quote, a free state, right? But he was trying to get support, to get enough people to support him, because he was slowly being identified as an anti-slavery candidate. And he did not want to be labeled with that. So he's trying to make it clear that, oh, no, wait a minute. I still think that the white race is a superior race. And he will lose that election, by the way, and then 2 years later will win the nomination and become the president, our 16th president of the United States. But Lincoln will morph. He will evolve from that mentality to the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. And then we will go to war, 677,000 lives, in order to eradicate slavery. So kudos to him for changing. I think sometimes change is good. Oh, and there is Honest Abe. So it was not Wallace that said it, but our own President Lincoln. What do you think the population of the Americas, North, Central, and South Americas, was when Columbus discovered America? Do you think it was 1 million? Do you think it was 10 million people, 50 million people, or 100 million people? 3 continents, 1492. Well, the correct answer is D, 100 million people. Between 1492 and 1600, 90% of the indigenous population in the Americas died. And that's about what, an 18-year or 108-year period. They died because of the violence and never before seen diseases that the Europeans brought, like smallpox, measles, and influenza. So boy, that arrival into the New World from Europe did not do any favors for the indigenous tribes living in all of those American continents. What is the largest city by geography in the United States? What is the largest city by geography in the United States? Notice I didn't say contiguous United States. The largest city in the United States is Juneau, Alaska. That city, believe it or not, covers about 3,000 square miles. If you look at a map and see where the borderline is for Juneau, you'll be blown away. It's larger than the entire state of Delaware, and in case you're wondering, Jacksonville, Florida is the largest city in the lower 48 states at just over 800 square miles. And as you may know, if you've ever taken an Alaskan cruise, you can only get to Juneau by air or sea. There are no roads going to Juneau. Isn't that something? One of our state capitals, you can't even drive there. Anybody been to Juneau? Let me see how many people have gone on. Oh, a couple have been on the cruise, yeah. Beautiful place to port and see and visit for about a day, and then you're ready to leave. There isn't a whole lot to see when you're there. Also, a few did you knows. How about this? Amelia Earhart designed her own line of clothes that were sold all over the United States. So that aviator look that she had and popularized, women were wanting to buy that look all over the United States. So she became fairly well-to-do and well-off because of that clothing line. Still kind of a mystery. We do not know where we even think she went down, but clearly she did, and we missed her. Do you know that there's no poisonous snakes in Maine? So ladies, you can take off your shoes when you're walking around the state of Maine. No poisonous snakes in Maine. President James Garfield, Ohio President James Garfield, once taught math at Hiram College in Northeast Ohio. I used to drive through Hiram back and forth when I was dating my wife who lived in Cleveland. I lived in Warren, right up 422, right through Hiram. And I always took pride in the fact that he used to teach there. Did you know that Martin Luther King Jr. was originally named Michael, just like his father was? But then when Martin Luther King Jr. was 5, his dad changed both of their first names to Martin. So he was actually born Michael Luther King Jr., and then after that, it technically legally became Martin Luther King Jr., and both his father and he shared that same first name. Do you know that Jimmy Carter was the first president ever born in a hospital? Isn't that something? All of our presidents, and it's Carter to be the first president actually born in a hospital. Did you know that General Robert E. Lee married a relative of George Washington by the name of Mary Ann Randolph Custis? Now, she owned a plantation back then called Arlington in Virginia, where they lived for 30 years until General Lee resigned his commission with the Union Army in order to go fight for the South. But that was after he was offered full command of the Union Army, which he almost took, but guess what took precedent to him? His state over his country. And because Virginia seceded, he felt obligated to go fight for the South. But that's how close he was to being the supreme commander of our army. Well, the Lees vacated that property in 1861, and soon after, Union troops would occupy it, and therefore 200 acres were set aside in order to bury all of the fallen dead Civil War soldiers. And of course, we know that today as Arlington National Cemetery. And now if you go visit that incredible cemetery, over 400,000 of our deceased military soldiers are buried there. And sadly, I just checked to make sure it's still this number, only 95,000 burial spaces remain. And of course, is it either served in war or served so many years on active duty that you're allowed to be buried in Arlington if you want? And I think you had to serve in time of war, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know how many more folk will end up being buried there, but it is a finite number of graves that they have at Arlington. A very somber place to visit. Country with a view. Well, immigrants being awed by the Statue of Liberty is a tale that's been romanticized over the years. However, this was a view for only the richest of passengers. The truth is, most immigrants who came here by ship in the early 1900s, as one set of my grandparents did, most immigrants were very, very poor. And as a result, they often traveled below the deck with hardly any view at all. And the very first thing that most of them remember is being herded like cattle onto Ellis Island. And of course, it is estimated that close to 12 million immigrants were processed through Ellis Island alone. Ellis Island alone. So it would not have been that beautiful of a cruise for them, to say the least. Do you know that Ben Franklin composed his own epitaph when he was 22 years old? Who would think to do that? And if you go to Philadelphia, it is written out on the tomb of his headstone, I guess that would be, and you can read it. You can also Google it and read it. I'm not going to go through it for you here, but it's very profound. He does a very good job at such a young age of writing his own epitaph. He died on April 17 of 1790, again at the age of 84 in Philadelphia. He was born in 1706. Any man that was born in that year had a life expectancy of about age 35. So he more than doubled the odds by living to be 84. A remarkable, remarkable thing to realize that, sickness, disease, hardship caused life expectancy to be so short in our country as it was back, say, in the early 1700s. Charles Lindbergh was not the first person to fly across the Atlantic. What? In 1927, Lucky Lindy was the first single person to make it across alone. 2 British pilots did it in 1919, meaning side by side in the plane, and 2 weeks later, 2 U.S. Navy pilots did the same thing. So 8 years prior to Lindbergh, it had already been accomplished. But what is amazing is that nobody remembers those other pilots, but they sure do remember Lindbergh because he did it alone. That was such a big deal when that occurred. 1927 was that flight. Who was the only president in the 1900s, the 100 years of the 1900s, who did not have a college education? Yep, Harry S. Truman. Turns out that he spent a semester at a local business college in Kansas City before dropping out to get a job. And anybody know what job he dropped out to get? To work in a haberdashery store, which is a combined, men's clothing store and shaving supplies, things like that. So Harry S. Truman never graduated from college. During the Civil War, of course, this should be apparent, more soldiers died of disease than they did from gunshots and fighting. Now, there's a range of how many people we think died in the Civil War. About 677 seems to be about where most historians fall back on. But the vast majority, as close to 60% of the deaths of the war, came from disease, often disease that was caught in the earliest boot camp trainings, because these boys that were coming in from the farms who had never been exposed to all these childhood diseases like measles and mumps and all that, chickenpox, they instantly get it when they mingle with the men coming from the large cities who had already built up immune systems against the diseases. And it just is amazing how rampant and quickly these diseases would spread through entire regiments, wiping many out before they even got anywhere as close to the battlefield. Which is the only state in the lower 48 states whose border touches only one other state? What? You mean there's not more than one state on the border of these states? No, and I heard the correct answer. It is indeed Maine. If you look at the state border, you'll see most of it is surrounded by Canada, as well as the Atlantic Ocean along its southern border, and it's New Hampshire is the only state that Maine borders up against. So that's a good one for the grandkids. See if they were paying attention when they were remembering all of their state capitals. Lovely Maine. I love to go to Maine. I've been there twice on vacation and want to go back already. Bar Harbor, one of my favorite places to visit. And also, did you know that the first holiday celebrated nationwide as a national holiday in the United States was the 100th anniversary of George Washington's inauguration. And that holiday was April the 30th, 1889. So it's the first day where everybody technically was supposed to be not working and remembering George. You know that John F. Kennedy is the only president of ours to have died before his parents. So his father, what's his first name? And his mother, Rose Kennedy, preceded him after his death. And of course, we know he was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. The very first coast-to-coast telephone line was established in 1914. So that's the first time you could make a call from New York to Los Angeles or San Francisco way back in 1914. 150 residences in New York City got the very first televisions made in 1936. So even before World War II, some people had televisions. And the very first program that NBC broadcasted to them was the cartoon called Felix the Cat. How many remember Felix the Cat? I do. Black cat, remember? He was a black cat. So yes, I thought that was interesting. The very first thing broadcasted on television was Felix the Cat, kind of neat. For many years, before dentures were invented, teeth were pulled from the mouths of dead soldiers for use as prosthetics. And that's because dentures were not invented until the 1850s, which would be after George Washington's death. So the question begs, did George Washington have wooden false teeth? A lot of people think that he did, but no. Washington's many false choppers, if you want to call them that, were made out of varying combinations of rare hippopotamus ivory, human teeth, and metal fasteners. But there is a picture, not of George's denture thing, but that's what it would have looked like back then before dentures were invented. You just had dead people's teeth in your mouth in order to chew your broccoli or whatever you were eating. In America, hard to believe, heroin was once a perfectly acceptable medicine prescribed by doctors for everything from coughs to headaches. And it wasn't until 1924 that Congress banned the use of heroin across the United States. Now, my father was born in 1918, my mother in 1921, so who knows, maybe they had been prescribed some heroin in order to settle that cough. But can you imagine that? It's just, yeah, we'll just get you a little bit of heroin, you'll feel fine the next morning, and they probably did. Ronald Reagan is best known, of course, for being president and acting in many Hollywood films, but he was also a prolific lifeguard. Has anybody ever heard this one? He supposedly saved 77 people from drowning. And there is a picture of him as a young man, teenager, I guess, in his lifeguard garb. But he lifeguarded for several years before his life started, his career started. But yeah, looks like a pretty fit guy. So thank you, Ronald, for saving the life of 77 people. A very famous Native American by the name of Blackbird was said to have loved his horse so much that he was buried sitting on top of it. So can you imagine the grave, how deep that grave would have to be? They placed the horse, of course, hopefully he's stiff, placed the horse first, and then lowered his body onto it, tied him to the horse so he wouldn't fall, and then started filling in the dirt. So he was buried sitting on top of his horse, which was his absolute last request. And there is Blackbird on the left. You know, before there were alarm clocks in the day, people would hire knockers up. Did you ever hear of a knocker up? These were people who were hired to shoot dried peas from a blowgun or tap at people's windows in order to wake them up in the morning. So you would hire somebody like this lady on the left, make sure I'm up by 7, and so she'd stand there with that pea shooter and kept popping that window until you got up and said, all right, I'm up. Same for the guy down there, he's tapping on a window. So that's a good way to earn some money, becoming a knockers up. Do you know that the use of the word hooker as a term for a prostitute actually originated with Union Civil War General Joseph Hooker, who brought prostitutes along on campaigns for his men. Now, he believed that those men were still going to go out and about on their own, catch venereal disease, get too sick to be able to serve. And so he brought doctors along with just wagons of prostitutes, making sure that they were clean and all that so that they couldn't spread disease, and then felt that it was a reward for his men for duty, I guess, service and duty. So that's where the term hooker comes from, a Civil War general. Also during the Great Depression, people often made clothes out of potato sacks. Anybody hear about that? Well, seeing the need for it, the distributors of those potatoes made their sacks more colorful and decorative in order to help people remain at least somewhat fashionable. And so people would make dresses, especially for the girls, shirts for the boys, but you can see those are potato sacks, and that's what they would do. They would reissue, or as we say, repurpose them for clothes, which you would have done too if you were so broke and penniless in the Depression that you had no choice. Albert Einstein could have been president of Israel when it first formed, but he declined. They really wanted him to. They begged and pleaded, but he said, nope, I want nothing to do with politics, and so he declined. And the very first gas-powered automobile accident in the United States occurred in 1891 in, of all places, Ohio City, Ohio. Anybody know where that is? It's still there. And it's located on the near west side of Cleveland. Well, only minor injuries were reported, but that very first accident took place in 1891, and it happened in good old Ohio. How about that? And lastly, New Jersey is home, not us, but New Jersey, is home to the world's highest roller coaster. The Kinga Ka is the world's tallest roller coaster at 456 feet in the air. Look at that. It is located in the Six Flags Great Adventure Amusement Park in Jackson, New Jersey, and at a speed of 128 miles per hour, it is considered the fastest roller coaster ever made. And if you've been reading the news, Cedar Point is going to be beating that record with a new coaster next year. So the one today is in New Jersey, but the real one, the big one, will be coming next year at Cedar Point. And finally, folks, true or false, was this the most fascinating and enjoyable presentation you ever sat through? A candy awaits you. Come on up and get something. That is true. Let me just ask if I can grab the microphone. Does anybody have any comments from anything I said that you'd like to share? Any question you might have or observation from what I said?
Joyce, tell her story.
I'm okay. Yeah, we'll get this turned on if it's not already. And Joyce, I want you to share, there she is over there. I want you to share your story about your ancestry with us. Since I'm just now starting to get in genealogy, I'm going to get on Ancestor.com and get my subscription going. But tell me about your relative.
Okay. Good afternoon. I grew up in Massachusetts, and my mother always said, oh, we go back to the Mayflower. And I thought, yeah, right. And closer. Okay, how's that? Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in Massachusetts, and my mother always said we went all the way back to the Mayflower, back to Miles Standish, and she had no other information than that. And so, of course, I thought, yeah, right. And a whole bunch of other things turned out not to be true. But one day, and of course, I was a kid, and so I didn't bother to ask any more questions. But one day, toward the end of her life, I said, well, how do you remember anybody's, your mother's maiden name or your grandmother's maiden name? The only clue I had, other than this myth, was that my great-grandmother's maiden name was Hall, H-A-L-L, which meant nothing to me as far as the Mayflower. So, and that's all I knew for years and years. And then when Ancestry.com and all that stuff came out, I said, well, we'll see. And sure enough, eventually, they hinted at it, and the Hall name went back a little. And, well, Miss Hall's mother was Isabel Standish. And then between, and I didn't go to any, I didn't hire anybody to do any of this, so I didn't pay anything for this except for membership in Ancestry.com and then some other place called Heritage.com. I think that one's free. And next thing I know, one's popping up, another one's popping up, and then they all fell together. And they all fell together within just a couple of weeks. Boom. I'm the 9th great-granddaughter of Miles Standish. Yay for me. So now I have to get all the actual paperwork together, which means I have to go to all the libraries and maybe hire somebody, who knows. And then I'll apply with the Mayflower Society. And hopefully, I'll be cool.
Thank you. And that's so neat. Someday I'll come back and give you a presentation on the journey of the Mayflower because it is unbelievable. And by the way, Miles Standish, of course, becomes the constable, the elected sheriff or constable of Plymouth because they needed somebody to be able to keep the peace, get people to follow the rules, and that was his big donation to the Mayflower. Yeah, exactly. Anybody else with a comment, a question, story they want to share about our great history? How many people took it in high school? History, okay. Did you like it? Did you think it was did you have a good teacher? Yeah, sort of. Me too. I had a good one. He inspired me to keep reading about it. Anybody else with a final comment, question, or remark? Well, then class is dismissed, Kim. Thank you, folks. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you, Kim, for having us.